Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got another amazing story coming to us from the US. We have Kimberly Phoenix on board. Now, this would be Kimberly's coming out of the Experiencer woodwork, so to speak. So this is her first time. For those who haven't had the pleasure of meeting Kimberly, Kimberly from a young age has experienced OBEs, lucid dreams, and the experience of seeing lights coming through the window of her childhood bedroom. And it wasn't until after experiencing an extended period of the dark night of the soul, where meditation became her practice, that the beings of light, who are called by many names, made an explosive appearance in her life at the age of 19. A spiritual awakening took place, which had a direct effect on her creatively, philosophically, and spiritually, as well as altered the way she viewed reality and herself. The result of that experience and all that was shown by the beings, which transformed her, resulting in constant telepathic communication, would lead her through the experience of losing her ability to walk, going blind, and losing everything, and out the other side where the light awaited. After healing from a decade-long period of suffering, sickness, and fear, the beings made another appearance in June 2019. UFOs showed up again in her life. The first, 3 days before her 42nd birthday, and the second, the night before her 42nd birthday. Soon after, she noticed an implant on her left collarbone. Since the appearance of the UFOs, joining a C5 group in 2020, her contact experiences have ramped up. She had visions of Orion, visions of the web of light that interconnects all dimensions and universes, and several contact experiences, as well as the ongoing telepathic communication that has evolved into channeling. Her life's purpose is to relay the messages given to her by the beings of light throughout the last 25 years and complete the book that has been in the making. So, Kimberly, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
My pleasure. I love having new stories and have the opportunity to meet new people. Certainly those that wish to come out, and because these are new stories to me. So if they're new to me, they're new to other people as well. So. Thank you so much. Now, is there a certain reason why you chose to come out now?
The main reason is because it's been 25 years since the initial experience that I had that was very explosive and life transforming. Since June 2019, the experiences have ramped up quite a bit. And I keep getting the message over and over again that it's time to finish the book and basically live my truth. And I also want to be somebody who tells her story, and hopefully in my telling of the story of my story, I will encourage other people to come forward with their experiences too that are considered unusual, metaphysical, and contact experiences. It's very important to me. It's my life purpose, and so here I am. I'm coming out of the experiencer closet.
Yay!
Yay!
And so, well, I had the pleasure of meeting you beforehand during a pre-interview, but so I know a bit about your story, but let's talk about you. Can you tell us a bit briefly of who you are?
Well, I am a single mother. I have a BSW, which is a bachelor's in social work. I'm very introverted, so actually coming out is going out of my comfort zone, to say the least. Mm-hmm. I'm a Cancer, and I am an INFP, and I'm also a writer, and I also love science fiction a great deal.
Yeah, don't we all? Okay. So many of us, our stories started off as a kid. Did yours start as a child as well?
Oh, yes. I was a very introverted child, very quiet. My experiences started out with OBEs and lucid dreams. I was very pathologically afraid of the dark because I was always the last one to go to sleep. But I would have experiences where I would see mists above me as I laid there in bed. And also a very strange occurrence that I look back on and I understand what they are now. But at the time, there would be lights coming through the window of my bedroom. And I labeled them helicopter spotlights that would periodically come. It was like a frequently occurring thing. And it got to the point where my sister and I covered the window with a blanket to shut out the light. And my parents didn't like that. They took it down. But anyway, that was how frequent it was.
Wow.
So the OBE experiences that I had, the flying dreams, the OBEs, were very intense and I didn't have the vocabulary back then to describe the lucid dreams or the OBEs. I just called them dreams. I later on learned what they in fact were. But I do want to talk about what led to a very interesting OBE experience. One day when I was about 9 years old, I was at school and a boy came up to me, and he was wearing a crisp white shirt. And I didn't really recognize him, but he told me to look up at the sky at the light, which I did. And that was a very odd experience. I never saw him again. I thought it was strange that a boy was wearing a crisp white shirt to school. And I remember thinking he must be getting his pictures taken or something. But later on in the night, I started to have issues with my eyesight where I saw blotches. And at the time, I called them cockroaches. But of course, they weren't cockroaches. They were just blotches. But in my childish mind, that's how I explained it. But soon after that, I started having very bad, very painful migraine headaches. And I mention this because it was a catalyst for what would come later. It was traumatic for me. I would end up going to the hospital after several hours of screaming and crying and having the weird experience. Now get this, of something I later found out was called the Alice in Wonderland syndrome, or Todd syndrome. And what it is things appear further away or closer than they actually are. And objects that's in your vantage point will appear to be either bigger or smaller. And I would have tunnel vision. And so this started, but I later realized, because of the messages I was getting later on, that the reason why I had these headaches was because my third eye was opening. And this also involved descending into the dark night of the soul, which is another catalyst that leads to spiritual awakening. And I noticed that when this started happening, I had my empathy was heightened, and I started having even more intense OBE experiences. And there's one particular one that stands out in my mind when I think back to my childhood, and it was around 12. So I want to explain to you what happened.
Can we get back to the boy really quickly?
Oh, sure.
No, yeah. Sorry about that. What type of light was he pointing to in the sky?
Well, this is where it gets weird, because at the time when I was a child, I thought he was pointing to the sun because that's how bright it was. And I realize now that it wasn't the sun. It was a disc, a lit up disc. Because when I think back to it, the sun was behind me, okay, and he was pointing at a different part of the sky. But at the time, I decided it, because I was a child, I decided it was the sun he was pointing at.
Okay. Well, it makes sense. Like, what would you be pointing at in the sky if it wasn't for the sun, really? Because we weren't really brought up to know about UFOs. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Please continue.
No problem. So back to an experience I had, an OBE experience that still makes me wonder quite a bit. I was sleeping, and I floated above my body, and I floated through the roof of my room, and then outside, I was outside the house. And it was a euphoric feeling. It was freeing. I felt so wonderful in this state. And I decided that I was going to go and visit my friend who lived around the block and surprise her. And so I decided to fly over, and it was easy to identify her house because her house was the only one at the time that had this humongous white satellite in her backyard. She was the only one who had this in their backyard. So it was easy to identify. And I remember flying to her backyard, and I opened up the French doors they had, and they were unlocked. And she had this little tiny toy poodle, and it started barking at me furiously. And the light came on in the hallway. And suddenly I realized I'm going to get in trouble if they see me. And so I left, and I woke up in my bed. But the weird thing was, even more weird thing was when I went to school the next morning, I told my friend what I had done, and I was referring to it as a dream. Okay. And she got very upset with me after I told her what I did, and the dog barking and the lights going on in the hallway and everything. And she got upset and she left. And I later caught up to her, and she was very animate that I had lied about what occurred in the dream, because what happened the night before was that her parents woke her up, and she got in trouble for leaving the French doors unlocked, because an intruder had come into the house. And the parents were awakened by the barking of the dog, and the dog ran out in the backyard and was furiously barking at something. And they decided it was an intruder because of how furious the dog was, how animate it was at, barking at whatever was in the backyard. And anyway, I think I kind of freaked her out a little bit, because she soon stopped talking to me over that incident.
You really freaked her out.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things you look back and you just wonder, that is it a synchronicity? Is it just a coincidence? I don't really think
so.
I don't really believe in coincidences.
That reminds me of a story when my mom passed away, like maybe like a few days later after that. Our dog, my dad's puppy, loved my mom and my dad very much. And then she's still alive. But when my mom passed away and we came back from the hospital, my dog was afraid to stay in the house as if my mom was there. She was afraid, like really afraid. She would stay outside on the front porch. She'd almost like fall asleep, but she'd stay there like until like the very last moment, until like we had to force her to come back in. So, the animals do see these things that we don't.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. Yeah.
Okay, so what happened after that?
Well, my migraines stopped pretty much around the age of 12. And that was a relief because it was very tiring going in and out of the hospital a couple times a week and having that experience. But I was left with anxiety and PTSD because of those experiences. It was traumatic. It was traumatic for me and very scary. And I descended into a depression because of it, as a result of the experience of going into the hospital and having that kind of pain and not knowing what was happening. So I kind of descended into a depression because of that. And I mention this because I really think that the dark night of the soul is a catalyst for spiritual awakenings. And I also wanted to mention that OBEs, lucid dreams, remote viewing, all these different meta experiences that humanity experiences, they're all kind of interconnected. They're interconnected. And I think that because of these experiences of having to go within because of experiencing some sort of trauma or some sort of depression or mental issues, it helps us to rise, okay? Because we have to explore, we have to go inside and do shadow work and whatnot. And I look back and I think that all these experiences I had are kind of interlinked. They're links in a chain that leads to, well, what I consider to be the most explosive experience that I had when I was 19. But I did have also strange experiences. I got inspired, motivated to go in the backyard and climb a ladder and lay on top of the house, on the roof of the house, to watch the stars. And I would do this every night. And a lot of nights, I would be up there for what seemed maybe 20 minutes, a half an hour, and I would come back down and the lights in the house would be off. And I would find the sliding glass door locked. And I would be confused. And so I would knock on my parents' window and they would be kind of mad at me because they didn't understand why I was out so late. And then I would discover that what seemed like 20, 30 minutes of being out there was actually a few hours. And my parents had forgotten that I had gone out there and they just shut down the house for the night. But I look back on that experience and I think that maybe something was happening to me that I just don't remember. And so this was when I was about 15, 16. And at this time, I had kind of isolated myself because I was still experiencing the dark night of the soul. And I started to practice something I called my mental exercise. And I was inspired to do this. And I later realized that it was meditation. And I look back at my thought processes when I was about 17, 18. And I just think it's kind of funny that I really honestly thought that I had invented meditation. And so I started practicing this mental exercise, and I would be in a certain pose to make sure I didn't fall asleep. And I was led to do it this way. And I would go under, and I would get into such a deep state of meditation that it was almost like an altered state or trance. And what I would experience would be sort of like going down a tunnel, okay? And I would feel light. I'd feel like I would be flying at times, and I would perceive that I was going down this tunnel. And there were times, not all the time, probably one time out of three, I would go down this tunnel and get really into a deep state where I would arrive at like a black void. And it was a very strange experience because I felt like wide open space. Like there was no end. It was just wide open space. And I started to see 3 points of light at the end of this tunnel. And that was comforting because before I would see just this black void. And when the lights showed up, I could sense, perhaps with my empathy, that I sensed that they were a presence in the darkness. And the feeling I would get would be euphoria. It was just euphoric. I just loved it. And I started practicing this every single day. And I began to realize after I would come back up that I would remember speaking during this altered state. And at the time, I couldn't remember what I was saying, but I definitely remembered speaking. And I labeled this to be speaking in tongues, even though I couldn't remember exactly what was said. And I labeled it speaking in tongues because that was my culture growing up, was in the Christian church. So all of this was unusual, but it was, excuse me, it was very euphoric for me to go through these experiences. And as I began practicing meditation more often, my mental exercise, there was an explosive experience that I went through that basically changed my life forever. And I kind of have to take a deep breath because it is a very odd and very beautiful experience when I think back on it. And it feels like it just happened yesterday. This is how intense it was. So I went under, just like the days passed, practicing my mental exercise. And I went through the tunnel, went very, very deep this time. And I saw the 3 lights. And this time there was an explosion of colorful lights. They were white, violet, and blue. And in quick succession, I was suddenly outside my body. And I was watching my physical body being lifted up by a cord of light that was coming from the crown of my head up towards the ceiling into nothingness. And the room was bathed in dark blue light, a very brilliant blue of light that I have not seen since. But the light was alive. What it looked like was ripples in water, sort of like how the ocean would look like at night with the moon kind of reflecting on the surface. And this was basically surrounding me. This light was surrounding me. And first I saw two beings. They were both kind of like a beige color, and they had slits for nose, a slit for a mouth, and a large cranium. And I saw one of them in the corner of my bedroom, and he kind of waved his hand at the corner, and it was like he was removing like a wet mural that was painted on a clear window. And when he did this, I saw space beyond, stars and whatnot. And I found myself in the center of the room, and there was a 3-foot podium type object. And it looked like it was embedded in what looked like circular panels in the ground, in the floor. And there was another being there that was closer to me, and he had no form. I could sense him. It was very obvious he was there, but I couldn't see him because he was more energetic, if that makes sense. And he basically linked with me telepathically. And there was this experience of a download that happened. And what I saw at first was evolution of life, of human life, consciousness life, sped up really fast. And meanwhile, I'm in a state of euphoria, and I'm downloaded with this information, and it all comes to a stop. And I'm in bed, and the light is gone, and I sensed like maybe 10 minutes passed for me. But when I looked at the clock, 4 hours had actually passed. And I just want to emphasize that this experience changed my life forever. Everything that I had experienced in my past suddenly made sense. The questions I had about, what is reality? What is the purpose of life? What is the nature of God? These things that were plaguing me, it felt like I suddenly knew. Okay. And to explain it, it's kind of complicated to explain it, but I was shown that when I saw this blue light and had this experience, I was actually in a kind of spacecraft. And I saw my room in there, but it wasn't really my room. It was like a projection, if that makes sense. And that was designed that way because I was supposed to stay in a state of euphoria, or feeling that feeling of interconnectedness, absolutely no fear whatsoever. And that was to aid me to stay in that state and not fall into fear oscillations. And it worked. And I'll tell you that when I would think back on it, like right after, I just felt like I understood what other people have talked about regarding God speaking to them. It's mind to mind, it's images, it's impressions, it's a very complicated, but it's a telepathic type of communication that happens. And after that experience, my life completely changed. I felt this very strong sense that I needed to help people. And it suddenly wasn't about me. It wasn't about feeling depressed. That was basically gone. And this was after like 7 years of having depression issues. And all of a sudden, it was like, it was all gone. The darkness was all gone. And this is where my life kind of started taking off because of that experience. I decided to come out of my shell, and I started dating again, or beginning to date, I should say, and meeting people and making friends.
Wow. Yeah, it really does change oneself when you go through these things. Mm-hmm. From one day of not seeing a UFO to the next day having a UFO fly over your house it's totally awesome. You're in awe. People say, "Oh, were you afraid?" No, you weren't. There's no time to be afraid. You're just looking at it and you're in awe. So, like seeing it again, an ET in whatever form it might have been, either like energetic or physical, it's quite amazing. Mm-hmm. Coming back quickly to when you climbed on top of your roof. Now, you didn't know anything about ETs back then, but you were drawn to at least look at the stars.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And the experience of doing that was kind of odd because it was like I was being called to do it. Because when I look back on it, I really didn't really like the idea of insects and whatnot, spiders and whatever. But that didn't even enter my mind. I didn't care. It was sort of like an automatic thing I was doing that didn't have too much thought behind it. It was like being called to go up there.
A friend of mine that I interviewed, he and I think his son, but they were being as if pulled to the back patio because like a UFO was waiting outside.
Yeah.
Now that's how they draw you out. So even if you're not really aware of it, but you are being manipulated to come out, and something's going to happen.
Yeah, it's sort of like you're being called and you're not sure exactly why, but it's like, okay, I'm just going to go out there. And then
another friend of mine, when she was a bit younger, I think I might have talked about this briefly, but in a past interview, but she was with a friend. And so like she was living in a small town, and they felt they had to like take their car and were being drawn to somewhere. And I think they were on the road. And when they got to a certain area, there was like this huge animal, let's say like a super huge dog or like a really out of place animal in the middle of the road. And they were like being drawn somewhere else until they got to this field. And where that field was a bit out of town, but there was a whole bunch of kids there. And everybody was drawn to that certain area of the
Wow.
of outside of town in the field. And eventually a UFO showed up overhead. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
they do stuff to get noticed. And
Yeah.
coming back really quickly to when you meditated, that really reminded me of when I would meditate a lot in 2012. I thought it was the end of the world, and so I had to at least put my attention that maybe try to shift the timeline. And so after like maybe half an hour of meditation, I'd get up to the point, to the void, and I felt I was being pulled into it, and I was afraid. And that's where I sort of the connection would stop, because it was I was afraid to go beyond that point. I felt I was being sucked into blackness. And another time I woke up and I know I'm asleep, but I'm conscious. But the thing is, even though you're in bed, your eyes are closed, I wasn't feeling my body. It's as if my eyes were open, but everything was black. I was in this void. I'm lying down, but for some reason, my hands are, imagine my whole body floating in the air, but my hands would fall to the side of me, like downwards.
Okay.
So I would be totally horizontal, but my arms would be, it's as if somebody was holding me up, but my arms would fall down and my legs were still up. And eventually, for some reason, I felt I was going back into my body, like ever so slowly. And then I would start feeling parts of my body coming back. That was really, really weird. But, these things happen, and I don't know why, but I thought I had to talk about that. Now, when you were with these beings, like, did you get a sense that they were trying to teach you something?
I later on came to realize certain things about that experience. And it was a very intense spiritual experience. I get this sense that it was my time to awaken, and these beings, who I call non-human intelligences or multidimensional beings or light beings, we're talking about the same thing with all these names, that it was just my time. And I still struggle a little bit with describing it. But what they showed me was that there were two types of beings there. The ones that were beige were sixth dimension beings, okay? And they had more of a solidness to them, but they were still very much not like human at all. But they had a more solidness. And the one being that was more energetic, that didn't really have any form whatsoever, that was more like a spiritual, energetic, more of a light being. And that one, which is basically not even this, where it gets kind of strange, is that it wasn't one being, but it was a group. But I perceived one, okay? But he was in charge of the process. And the sixth dimension beings were kind of there to observe and aid the process. And I also get the sense that they are part of my soul circle. They're interconnected with my soul. So for me, when I think of them, I don't think in terms of alien or separateness. I feel like they're linked to me. Okay, very much like how you are linked to your Earth family. and the different circles that you're involved in, your friends and beyond, that they are linked to me.
Do you ever think that you had like somebody watch over you, a guide, someone that protects you?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I do believe that they're the same ones.
Okay.
I would feel, during the dark nights of the soul, I would get impressions, intuitions, and that's how I was led to do the mental exercise, aka meditation. And that was part of it, part of the whole spirit guide type of thing. We are basically talking about the same thing. Okay. But it's based on your cultural orientation and how you perceive these things. And I think that they take on different forms. Like, for instance, if I didn't learn later on what they really were, I would still be calling them angels. Okay. Even though they looked odd and they would be labeled aliens, I would still be thinking of them in terms of angels or spirit guides.
Okay. Now, all of this brought you to automatic writing.
Yes. I noticed after this experience, I would start getting the urge to write. And it started out, doing circles and scribbles, and I would ask a question. And as I was doing these circles and scribbles, the message, the answer would come in. And I would be left with a sense of, where did that come from? Because the language was different. Well, the words that were used were different than what I was used to hearing in church, for instance. And I started doing this all the time. And then I started to write down directly in written form in English exactly what was being conveyed through my mind. And at the time, I didn't have vocabulary for what was happening. But I later learned that this was kind of the beginning to channeling. And so this became my life. I would think of a question, or I would have a subject come to my mind, and all of a sudden I would get a response. And the response was telepathic in nature and would sometimes be images, but they were telepathic. And I had to wrap my head around that one because I didn't understand what was happening. I didn't have the word channeling. And the idea brought images of when people talk to the people who have passed on. And that's not what I was experiencing. So I thought this was a new thing that I was experiencing. And this was before the internet, by the way. It was before I had access to a computer. And I later on started talking about my experience in chat rooms, AOL chat rooms. And it was there somebody decided to tell me, well, that sounds like a Kundalini Awakening, where the energy comes out the crown of your head. And at the time it was like, oh yeah, it sounds plausible. I didn't understand exactly what it was. But later I realized it was because it wasn't a Kundalini, but it was an awakening of sorts. But it was, to me, I would use the words having a consciousness portal opened. And as time went by, I realized that everybody has this ability. And what this cord is the higher self. It's kind of like an umbilical cord, a consciousness, energetic umbilical cord that links your ego, your human mind, to your soul, the wisdom of your soul. And you access this portal through meditation, through constant practicing of meditation. You're able to turn it on and become aware of it. And you can also call this the sixth sense. You can call it the third eye. It has many, many names, but it's something that humanity has been experiencing for quite a while. And many people on Earth, I've met a few people who've had similar experiences where the third eye or the sixth sense is opened and it transforms their life.
You've got a pretty cool story regarding some of your abilities. There's one particular regarding your husband.
Oh, yes. My now ex-husband. But anyway, before I met him, and it was April 2000, before I met him, I had a dream that I was walking with a gentleman who had a fedora, and we were walking through a facility and through a corridor to this kind of outside area that had a Greek style statue in a fountain. And it stuck out in my brain because I love Greek artifacts and I love those things. And I just thought it was so unusual. But we were also walking with an older lady as well as this other lady that was kind of like giving us a tour. And it stuck with me because it was very lucid. It was like it was taking place. And then I met him and I told him that I wanted to become a CNA, and he was awesome. And he encouraged me to begin the process. And so we did a tour. This was like maybe 4 or 5 days after I met him. We did a tour at a local training college. And lo and behold, the events that happened in my dream, which I had written down at the time. And I was basically experiencing my dream where we were being led through the facility by this lady who looked exactly the same as she did in my dream. And it completely came full circle when I saw the Greek statue that they had outside the fountain. Oh, it was so exhilarating. The only weird difference was that the older lady who ended up being his grandmother was not physically there in the actual experience, but she was there in the dream, which I thought was interesting. And he was wearing a fedora like he was in the dream. So that was encouraging because I realized that, yes, I was supposed to be with him.
That brings up to a miracle birth story.
Oh, yes. So I worked in the hospitals for a while, not too long, but then my then husband encouraged me to go to college because he thought that I was smart enough. And so I did work in the social work field for a little bit. And then we decided that we were going to start a family. So I quit my job when I was about 3 months pregnant because I had a sense that I would need to anyway. And sure enough, 3 months after I quit my job, when I was about 6 months pregnant, I had to be put on bed rest. And I had some health issues revolving the pregnancy, but one of the things that would come to me almost every day was, I'm going to have an emergency C-section and I'm going to have a pulmonary embolism. And I would brush it off. I would think, I'm just being fearful, because to me, a C-section was the most awful thing, because when I was doing my training as a CNA, I witnessed a C-section in the background, and I just did not want to have one. So I blew it off as just being fear, and time went on. And then I went into labor one day, which evidently was the 8th wedding anniversary between my husband and I, was that day. And I went into labor, and I was rushed to the midwife facility where I had planned to give birth underwater and have a very spiritual birthing experience. But when I got there, they were like, you can't have your baby here. You have to go to the hospital. So we went to the hospital, and they discovered that my daughter's heartbeat was erratic. So lo and behold, I was scheduled for an emergency C-section. And it was that moment that I realized that that was precognitive insight I was having while I was pregnant. So I was rushed into the operating room, and they opened me up, and the doctor discovered I had a very horrible, her words, horrible infection in my uterus. That was basically it wasn't detected by the midwives for whatever reason, but she opened me up and she said it was the worst infection that she had ever come across. And so my daughter was born, and she was born basically sleeping. She didn't cry or anything like that, but she was whisked away because, as I later come to realize, that babies who are born in infected wombs, they usually have lung development issues. And so they have to spend some time in NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. And it's because of just the environment is not conducive to being healthy. But my daughter was 100% healthy, and she was, there was nothing wrong with her whatsoever. And it didn't really hit home how significant it was. But all the doctors that came to see me would make comments. They would say, "Oh, you're that lady who gave birth and you had that horrible infection, but your baby was 100% healthy." And they would look at me and they would say, "Do you know that never happens?" And that kind of, hit home that my daughter was extremely lucky, not really. It was meant to be that way. 4 days after I gave birth, they discovered a pulmonary embolism as well. And so I had to stay in the hospital for an extended period of time. So that was a very trying period, but I focused on nurturing my daughter and welcoming the experience of motherhood. But I was in the hospital for quite a long time, about 10 days. And this led to another experience that kind of disrupted my life for about a decade. On the day I was being discharged, I started having pain in my extremities. And I told the nurse this, and it was kind of concerning me. But the nurse just wanted to discharge me because there was another patient who needed my room. And so I was released. And by this time, from the onset of the pain, like 45 minutes, I had extreme weakness in my legs, and I lost the ability to walk. I was right back in the hospital the next day, and it was extremely scary to experience this, because it was like my legs were working normal, and then all of a sudden I couldn't hold myself up, and I was experiencing a lot of pain. So I was admitted, and I had to undergo quite extensive inpatient physical therapy for about 3 to 4 weeks. And this was, not being able to be at home with my daughter, but my sister helped and would bring my daughter into the facility so I could, continue bonding with her. So this kind of became my life, where I was learning how to walk again. And it was extremely hard while in the inpatient therapy. And once I was able to use a wheelchair and use a walker for short bursts of time, they released me. And I started doing outpatient physical therapy. But if you could imagine being at home with a newborn, and when I would hold her, I would have to be in the wheelchair, and I would continue practicing with the walker, but I fell so many times. My legs would suddenly decide to stop working, and I would just hit the floor. And this happened quite a bit. So this was a trying period of time. I think that I kind of was detached a little bit from what was happening, because in my mind, I would constantly think, they're just going to figure out what's wrong with me, and I'm just going to need a surgery, and voila, I'm going to have complete use of my legs again. And I would go through, just got to wait it out. I just got to wait it out, do my exercises, go to outpatient physical therapy, and go from there. But I tried to focus on the positive, which was having my daughter and focusing on taking care of her during this time.
So a lot of bad things happened to you after that. Because of what happened to you, you lost your husband. Mm-hmm. And I think that your insurance also.
Yeah. And by this time, it was told to me about 18 months from the onset of symptoms would be basically where I would be at for the rest of my life. This is what I was told, but I had this sense that that wasn't going to be the reality. And I was determined to get better and to work on myself. And yeah, one day, my husband told me that I was sick and I wasn't getting any better. So we couldn't work on our marriage. And looking back on that, that was basically not true. I was actually getting better very slowly, because when you have a neurological issue, it takes a very long time for the myelin sheaths to regenerate and heal. By the way, I was diagnosed with transverse myelitis, which is the result of having a lesion on the spine. And so basically, we went our separate ways. And it was a very painful experience. And it took years and years to work on myself and to heal from that. But I came to the realization that if he hadn't done what he did, I wouldn't have later experienced the things I experienced involving healing. If he hadn't done what he did, I would still be taking medication and having my mind altered because of the medications that I was on to help with the nerve pain. And so I basically realized that was the reason why it ended like that. And it was you can always tell when something weird is happening, when the person you've been with for quite a long time completely does a 180 and doesn't have too much of an explanation for you regarding it, but it's like reality is altered when that happens. And I had to really do a lot of soul searching, but I luckily came across people who helped me. For instance, I had a therapist who was into energy psychology. And what that is I don't know if I forget exactly what the letters mean, but it's EFT, it's tapping. And it uses meridian, I don't even know what you call it, but the meridians in the body, sort of like acupuncture, where you tap and you can bring about healing. And so I was practicing this, but it was a series of losses and descending into another dark night of the soul after that. And I'm kind of losing my train of thought, but I have to fast forward a little bit, because in 2018, another period where things seemed to be going even more downhill and rock bottom, because I started losing my eyesight. And it started out with blurry vision, but I went from having slightly blurry vision to becoming legally blind in like 6 months. And around this time as well, I was losing my house. I had to figure out where I was going to live. I lost my insurance, and also the doctors decided that they weren't going to treat me anymore because of that. So all of these things were happening, and it was chaos. I just thought, things are just, they're not going to get any better. It's getting bad. But lo and behold, I would pass by this house that was close by the neighborhood where my daughter's school was. And I would keep getting this sense, I need to call this number of the sign that was out front. And that led me to figuring out where to live. And I also figured out that my eyes could improve with surgery because I had a very aggressive form of cataracts, early onset cataracts. And, you know, I didn't have the funds at the time, but all these different events came together at exactly the right time I needed them, which I look back and it's not a coincidence. All these events just came together and it was like night and day. It was like my life is over one day, and then all of a sudden the next day everything comes together and you're good, you're fine. And one of the biggest things, what happened in the fall of 2018 was I realized I had healed. And the healing was unexpected because basically I was taking medication on a schedule, and I always knew when the time for the next dose was happening because I would start experiencing pain in my legs. And I tapered off because, you know, I wasn't going to get any more prescription for the nerve pain. But I realized as, you know, I took the last pill and I was waiting. I was just waiting for the pain to come back, but it didn't. And I realized I had healed. And I was shocked. I didn't trust it at first. I thought, oh, maybe some of the medication was still in my system. And I kind of was bracing myself. I was regulating my activity because activity would make the pain worse. So I was limiting that. But as 2019 came around and it was a month, 2 months, I started to trust that this was okay. And I started doing more activities, becoming more normal. I guess it's important to mention that my life had been altered for 10 years where I couldn't do much. And I had to do activities to regulate the pain because the medication didn't take away all the pain. And I had to do distraction activities, mostly on my iPad, to try to get my mind off of the pain. And so I had lived 10 years basically living a new normal. And then 2019 comes around and I don't have any more side effects from the medication. I am able to do more things. And so I had to spend a lot of time in 2019 basically reprogramming my mind, reprogramming habits. And so I set out doing this, and I had to kind of create a new normal from there. And this leads to what happened this summer of 2019. And I just want to also mention that throughout all this time, I was having constant communication with the light beings, and they were kind of helping me through the process that I was going through. But 2019 came around, and the summer, it was June, and there was something astronomically happening that month, I later found out. But for some reason, it was just like a very spiritual month for me. And I started to basically talk. You can call it prayer. You can call it just having a communication of asking the light beings for another experience. And one night, it was at night, and I had just put my daughter to sleep, doing the nighttime rituals. And I came into the living room and the TV was off, and I saw my cat asleep on a pillow. And I just kind of sat down on the chair, and all of a sudden a voice said, "Hello." And my cat looked up out of being in a deep sleep and looked in the direction of where this voice was coming from, which was like maybe a couple of feet in front of me. And I wasn't scared or anything. I was just kind of like, all right. Because the voice sounded very odd. It sounded like a robot on helium. It was electronic in nature, sort of, but not quite, because there was this weird kind of distorted helium element to it, if that makes sense.
So high-pitched type of hello?
Like a kid, sort of like a kid, sorry. And yeah, it was a very, very strange tone. And I kind of said, "Well, hello," back. I wasn't scared or anything, but I later told the story of this happening, and people looked at me like, well, if I heard a voice say hello and I'm the only one in the house, I think I would be a little scared. But I wasn't scared at all. But I started to sit there and think about it. And I was like, well, maybe my roommates are pranking me or something like that. They don't do stuff like that. But I was thinking maybe that was it, even though I kind of sensed that wasn't it. But it's one of those weird high strangeness experiences that I've heard other experiencers have. And I later told my daughter about it, and she kind of looked at me too and be like, "Why weren't you scared?" And I really don't have an answer. I think so many strange things have happened to me that are considered strange, that I just embrace it all, and I'm not easily scared or shaken up by it anymore. So that's how I think of that. But that month, June 2019, I was just in a different state the whole month. But 3 days before my birthday, I witnessed a UFO. I had to pick up my roommate from his work, and I got in my car, and I had just watched a video by David Wilcock, and he discussed synchronicities and numbers, and looking at clocks and finding like 1:11 or 4:44 or something like that. And so I was driving, and I'm like, yeah. And I look at the odometer, and it's like the mileage, it's 444.1. And then I get this sense, so I'm gonna look up, and that's when I saw the UFO. And it was kind of like a tree line height, kind of close to the car. And it was lit up. It was white on the blue spectrum, just lit up white. And I remember looking at it, and I didn't I can't even describe to you what shape it was, because it was such an unusual shape. And I was trying to figure out what it was. And it was kind of following above as I was driving. And it was kind of small. It looked like one of those really small vehicles you see nowadays that can only fit like 1 or 2 people, but they're very, very small. It was
smart car, I think.
Yeah, it's those
2 places.
unusually small ones. And that's kind of like how I perceived the size of it. And it was kind of following along. I could see it above and trying to drive at the same time. But at the end of the road, it zipped off at an incredible rate of speed, and it left a tail behind it, and it was just gone. But I was so euphoric when I saw it. I was so happy. I was just so happy, and just made my night.
Was it glowing?
Yeah, it was glowing white on the blue spectrum.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's kind of one of those weird, kind of reminiscent of the past, seeing white light that's kind of on the blue spectrum.
You sent me a drawing of like a UFO with the round circles. They could be they could be windows beside a mountain. Was that one? That
one happened the night before my birthday. So the one I just talked about happened 3 days before my birthday. And I thought that this was the greatest present ever for a birthday. But the night before my birthday, I was again driving in the car to pick up my roommate. And there's a stretch in the road where you can see the mountains beyond. And I kind of looked out and I saw this UFO. It looked kind of big. It was next to the peak of the mountain, and it was shaped like a saucer, like an upright saucer and an upturned saucer, like kind of like this, closed down like that. And in the center was these orbs of light that kind of reminded me of a string of pearls. And the light from those were also white on the blue spectrum, just a really beautiful color. And as soon as I saw it and I realized what I was seeing, it just disappeared. Each of those orbs that were encircling it went out one after the other really, really fast. And it was gone. So that was also an experience where I was just over the moon. I was so happy to have witnessed it. And it was a very explosive experience that just gave me euphoria, just like this euphoric.
How big was it? Did you get a good sense of it?
Goodness. It was humongous, judging from the distance and because it was next to a mountain peak.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's impossible to really, but it had to be pretty huge. And I later thought about it and I'm like, there is absolutely no way I'm the only one who saw this. There's no way. And so I started to do a search and nobody was reporting it. So I did a report on the National UFO Reporting Center. I reported both incidences because I was convinced somebody else had to have seen it, but apparently I was the only one who saw it.
Okay. Yeah, these services are pretty cool. There's one, I think you've got like a sort of Google map that appears and it tells you a whole bunch of sightings where they're located. So you always know if there's one near your home. Yeah. When I called in my 2 UFOs, I did write up a a testimony, and I got called up by MUFON eventually.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. Okay, so you had those two encounters. Then you've got a story about an implant.
Yes, and this is where it gets kind of odd. I would say probably a couple days after I saw the last UFO, the big one, I noticed that I had a bump on my clavicle, and it was unusual in appearance. It looked like a blister, but with like a dark gray sphere inside. And it was very unusual. And finally, I was just so disturbed having this bump here that I decided I was going to perform a little surgery. And I disinfected a needle, disinfected the skin with some rubbing alcohol. And I took the needle and I was stabbing at the bump. And the tip of the needle would not permeate the skin at all. It just wouldn't. And no matter what angle I went in, tried to go in, it would not permeate the skin. And finally, I just gave up. And it was odd because after that experience of really wanting it to be gone, I basically didn't care about it any longer. I didn't think about it. It was not even in my mind anymore. Before, it was just all I could think about was why is it there? I don't get bumps like that. So it was very highly unusual. So I kind of experienced just kind of like being detached and not worrying about it anymore. But that was kind of unusual. But life carried on. You know, I would talk about my UFO experiences of that month. And later on, the following year, I watched Dr. Greer's CE5 documentary, which really resonated with me because I agreed with him about these beings being multidimensional beings. And I completely resonated with that. But I also realized that I had been doing a version of the protocols during the months or the weeks that were before I saw my sighting. Before I even heard the hello, I was doing these protocols and I didn't even realize it until I saw that video. So I decided I was going to join the group that was being put together, a CE5 group. And this was a very important thing for me because the people I met in this group were pivotal in what would take place later. I came out to them at first. I told them of my experiences when I was 19, and they were very receptive. And this gave me courage because I had not really told too many people about it, especially not in person. And so having this group was extremely important. And I'm thankful for them, for this group of people. They're very spiritual and very open-minded. And I really needed that after so long kind of being isolated. And this was during, you know, the pandemic. And so this was a pivotal experience of meeting these people and going out and doing CE5 sessions.
The implant eventually came out, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And this is kind of a weird experience too. I'll skip ahead a little bit, but what happened with that later on was this year, July 6th, I woke up and the bump had changed shape, and it wasn't firm anymore. It just seemed flatter. And so I'm like, what is up with that? And I went to the mirror and I was kind of examining it. I was like, what is happening? And the dark object that was there moved on its own and popped out. And I took it and I later put it in tissue and a plastic bag. And don't ask me why I did that. I just thought maybe it was good to hold on to it. So I have it like tucked away somewhere. But that was a very odd experience. But I look back on it because there were some things that I realized about what it could be, what my intuition tells me it was. And it was a healing thing. It wasn't nefarious whatsoever. It was involved with healing and also involved with the channeling. And kind of going back a little bit, I had visions during summer of 2020. I saw a web of light after going into meditation, and the web of light was beautiful. It was in HD full color. It was pulsing with white, purple, and blue light. And it was beautiful. It was just beautiful. It was a representation of the interconnectedness of all of consciousness. And it was depicted as this web of energy. And the next vision I had was a vision of Orion. And this also happened during meditation, where I went very deep, and all of a sudden I saw a view of stars, and there was a figure superimposed on the night sky that was Orion. It was basically Orion with a bow and arrow. And I would move the scene of the stars using my thought. And that was a very cool experience. And I wrote about it, in my journal. And I think I told some of the members of the CE5 group that I had this experience. And I started to realize it was because the beings I had been in contact with are associated with Orion somehow. And I was shown that they came from that area. It gets kind of convoluted a little bit, because it was like that was their position when they were a lower density being. It was like their last location, because when you go up in dimension, you become non-local as you go up in the dimensions. So this brings me to my other experiences that happened in 2020 happened in October 2020. The first one is kind of high strangeness. It happened October 11th. I went into meditation after being obsessed with looking up information on the Orion constellation. And then I was called into meditation. And while I was in meditation, I saw the seed of light like I usually do, which is like a pinpoint of light during meditation. And I suddenly saw a inverted triangle, and it was the colors of blue and green kind of moving together, and it was the shape of a triangle, which I later realized was significant, but it looked like it was made out of laser, the triangle. It was very bizarre. And I saw in the center of the triangle these flashes of different shapes of beings, like different contorted images of beings, just flashing. And I didn't have any emotion about it. I just kind of observing. But as this was happening, I started to feel vibration in my body and sounds. When you're an experiencer, you have to pay attention to any sensations that you feel, impressions and noises. And it almost sounded electronic in nature. And I also felt throbbing on the left side of my head, like something was being pressed against my head that was vibrating. And I heard ringing in my ear. And the air pressure changed while I was in meditation. I felt like I couldn't move. And I felt these sensations in my legs and tingling. But I look back on it and I get the impression that there was something in the room with me. And I felt like this was kind of a certain mode of contact, but kind of more subtle, like a subtle contact experience. But the appearance of the triangle was extremely important because I later realized, because of the experiences that happened after, that the triangle depicted the number 3. And it was because I was to have 3 contact experiences during October. The second one would happen on the 20th. I realized as I look back on the October 11th experience that it was an experience to get me ready for the following experiences. But the October 20th experience was a little bit less explosive, or involved less sensation, but I was awakened by a clunking noise. And I looked at the foot of my bed and I saw a distorted being moving. And it was kind of, it wasn't solid. it was like a mirage almost. It was like a distorted projection, if you will. But as I look back on it, I kind of think that they resembled the beings that I saw when I was 19, the beige beings, but not in their complete form because of how strange and distorted it was. But it was in the process of climbing up on the bed. And then I woke up, and I don't know what happened after that. Strangely enough, I wasn't scared seeing this being at the foot of my bed. I was not scared at all. I was kind of detached at the time. But the next morning, I discovered marks on my leg. 6 marks on my leg that had a pattern to them. That kind of, when I filled in the lines and I was measuring between the marks, I marked my skin, and it kind of took on the shape of like a bow. And that kind of reminded me of the visions of Orion. And, you know, I could think to myself, well, that's a coincidence. But no, it wasn't a coincidence. The pattern was too perfect. And I don't get marks like that on a regular basis. So I don't. So it was one of those things where I was shocked, and I took a picture, and I sent the picture to a member of the C5 group. I was like, yeah. I was telling him all along about these experiences I was having, and he was so open, and thank God for him, because these weird things, you have to have somebody to talk to about them. It's so important, you know, to try to make sense of them, and and to have it accepted and to not be judged as a result of relaying what is happening. But yeah, so I had these marks, and it took a little bit of time for them to go away. And I just thought to myself, you know, it's just another one of those cool things. It's like having physical 3D evidence that your experience is real, is like real. And that's comforting to a certain extent, to have those things happen. But of course, you know, I look back and I really think that something else happened that night that I just simply can't remember.
So you woke up at whatever time you saw the distorted gray face, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
Did you feel like drugged up? How did you feel?
I felt detached.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. I don't remember having any paralysis issues.
Yeah.
But I just felt just detached. Like, oh, well, there's a being at the foot of the bed. Oh, he's in the process of climbing on the bed. And it was like I was just observing, and I was very detached.
Yeah, well, same thing for me, because in 2007, 2008, I didn't know anything about ET. But you know, there was a lot of ghost stories in my family. Mm-hmm. So when I woke up one morning during the summer, it was, you know, fairly hot outside, and I realized that there's, you know, I opened my eyes, and you know, my eyesight was a lot better then, and I get the feeling there's something floating in the air. So I really fixate on a certain part of the you know, the bedroom just above the bed, and I realized that there's like something dark. I realized that there's an outline, so I start tracing my eyes all around the outline, mm-hmm. and it felt like it looked like an upside down guitar pick, with the biggest part at the top and the pointy bottom, you know, at the bottom. And so I start concentrating inside, because I could see through it. It was like semi-transparent. And I realized at the top, inside were perfectly round eyes, big round eyes, but not the tear shape that you normally get with the grays. But then the head would come down in a pointy shape. And I said, oh my God. So it's probably like, okay, there's a ghost looking at me. But I was, again, like you, I was detached. I was just looking at it, thought, okay, there's something there. It can't do anything. And I looked at it for like 30 seconds. And then I decided to swing over, hug my girlfriend at the time, and I fall asleep. And so, yeah, I don't know if when I had shadow beings in my bedroom, I was drugged up that time. I had trouble like moving and the bed. I wasn't paralyzed, but yeah, so they definitely do something to us to make us more compliant, perhaps, or less fearful, because they don't want to be harmed as well. So I totally get it. But the fact that you were seeing like a distortion or an image, it could have been a projection. Mine could have been a projection. It could have been out of phase, could have been there, but again, different realities, different vibrations. We got to think about those too. But oh yeah, coming back to the implant, the thing that, okay, you sent me the photos. When I looked at it, okay, it looked like a grain, but if it would have been like on your foot, people could have said it's a grain of rock. But the thing is, it did not create infection. It did not create redness. It did not. It wasn't as if the body was trying to force it out. Because when there's like a foreign body in your, have you ever had like a rock or something stick into you, or the body creates a redness around it and tries to push it out either with pus or something.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the case with yours.
Yeah, not at all. It didn't behave like you would think. And I'm not prone to getting marks like that. Never. And I suppose if it was like a common occurrence that they would just appear, then I could draw to the conclusion that it was just one of those things. But because it appeared not long after my 2019 UFO experiences, you start kind of stringing things together.
Yeah.
And you come to some realization about it. But I do find it strange that after I became so obsessed with trying to get rid of it with the needle and it not working, that I completely, I just didn't really care about it being there. And coming from a kind of like a semi-medical background, when you have growths or anything like that, it's important to go and get them looked at by a doctor. And that didn't even really cross my mind at all. It felt like that it was just supposed to be there.
Strange.
Yeah.
Iridescent beings. Yeah, October 26, 2020.
Yeah. That was kind of like the buildup from the other two experiences, because the first one was kind of subtle, involved sensations and sounds, and the second one was visual and sounds and left marks. And then the third one was just kind of like the full circle coming around. But that experience starts out with a lucid dream. And it involved being in a courtyard. And there was a well in this courtyard. And the wall looked kind of ancient, like with ancient blocks. But there were like tents, dwellings within this courtyard. And I saw this group of little guys, and they weren't children, but they had blue uniforms on. I couldn't really make out exactly the details of their features, but they were short, like 3 foot, maybe 4, but that's kind of too tall, but it was kind of that range. But there was a group of them in this courtyard, and they were kind of hanging out, and this lady came out, a young lady came out of the tent and saw these little guys, you know, just kind of there. And they were very out of place because the ambiance of the courtyard and the well and the attire of the young lady all seemed to be kind of like ancient. From the past. She was kind of dressed up like a gypsy with like a headdress and robes. And she saw the beings, and my perspective kind of skips around, which is unusual in a dream. I was the little guys first. I was basically there, and it was like a feeling of exploration, of greeting, of, you know, just kind of there experiencing. And the young lady, when I skipped to her perspective, she kind of saw the beings as unusual visitors. And then all of a sudden, older lady came out of the tent and saw the little guys running around in the courtyard, just roaming around, just kind of looking at things. And she did not like their presence at all. The older lady was just furious that these entities were there, and she felt kind of like they were invading, and she saw them as evil. And so she started to launch an attack against them, where these like many lightning strikes were being emitted from her palms. And the little guys were running around trying to avoid being attacked. And the young lady, she was trying to stop the violence and get between the older lady and the beings in order to protect them, because she saw them as completely different and wanted to protect them. And I remember that I was like, yes, this resonates with me. I identified with what she was doing. I didn't identify with what the older lady was doing. And as soon as I identified with the young lady, all of a sudden my dream was interrupted. And I woke up, and I was looking at the face of a gray. But, you know, this is where it gets kind of strange, because he had, you know, the shape of a gray, you know, with the large cranium and the big black eyes, but he was lit up. He was lit up, and it looked, the light looked, you know, kind of white, but on the blue spectrum again. So it kind of gave the odd perception of gray, but it wasn't really, it was more white was the dominant color. And when I examined the way he looked, there were these points of light, and they were the colors of violet and blue, different shades of violet and blue. And he was really beautiful. He looked like a lit up being. And I noticed on either side of him was another being that was close to the dresser to my left. And there was another being that was close by the closet that was closer, to my right. But they were kind of in the background, and they didn't look the same as this guy that was basically not too far away from my face. And I could also see his white collar of what I assumed was like from a uniform. And it was a distinctive white collar. And of course, being surprised, from a dream state and seeing the being looking down at you, what happens is you start to panic a little bit because of the surprise. You're not expecting it. But I couldn't move. I remember not being able to move and being upset by that. And I conveyed the message telepathically. If you don't stop, I'm going to rain down the power of the universe on you. And I look back and I kind of shake my head at it now, but it was a knee-jerk response. And as soon as I said that, I was starting to move again. And I remember my right hand kind of brushing against him, kind of like to push him away, because I did feel like I was being held down. So I kind of brushed my right hand against him, but there was this loud clunking noise and a flash of light, and they were gone. They were just gone. And I looked at the time, and it was exactly 1:00 p.m. or a.m. And I was just beside myself, and I jumped out of bed and I went to the backyard, and I looked up over the house, and I could have sworn that I saw a light getting smaller and smaller, like it was ascending, and it was gone. And I came back inside, and I messaged one of the members of the C5 group. And I was kind of like still in a state of being in shock. But later on, as I started thinking about it, it wasn't a nefarious thing. It wasn't evil or anything like that. But boy, when your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in, it's fight or flight. And I get the sense that they know about this, about humans. They know this. But the next morning, I was kind of going back and forth, messaging one of the members of the C5 group. But I later noticed that my right hand had burns. And it was exactly the part, like my pinky, the side of, that side of my right hand, that it was all, the skin was all messed up. It was red, it was splitting, and it felt like a burn. And my pinky became stiff where I couldn't bend it. And it got worse as the day went on. And I'm not prone to getting ailments like that ever on my hand. So I realized that it was associated with brushing my right hand against the being.
Okay.
If that makes sense. And
yeah.
I get the sense that it was kind of an accident, like I wasn't really supposed to wake up.
Okay.
And because I moved, some sort of strange thing happened because of the energy. I think that there was like something energetic that happens when you're interacting or having contact experience with multidimensional beings. And part of the reason why paralysis takes place is because you will be harmed if you move. I get the sense that that's what was happening to me. I was being moved by, let's call it some sort of energy force field. And I was being moved back into bed. And I wasn't really supposed to wake up and start flailing around a little bit. So I think it was an accident that I got this burn on the side of my hand, which, by the way, took forever, weeks and weeks for it to heal. It just took forever. Yeah.
My friend Steve Boucher, when he and his band members, he's a friend of experiencer friend from Toronto, Canada, and he was being brought on board the craft physically with other of his band mates, and by the Greys, and they were all in a line walking up into the craft, and the Greys said, "Don't touch the UFO," but my friend actually touched the main entrance, the main doorway, with his finger, and a weird wart grew on his finger, and it took forever to get rid of.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So yes, stuff does happen. Coming back to when you were meditating, and a lot of people don't meditate, or at least they don't see sometimes certain things when they meditate, and it's a subject that's really complicated because you don't know what really happens. Sometimes we go out of body and we experience these things that actually happen, but we take in as a dream. One time I was with right beside a young boy, and I think I was sort of related to that kid, but he was training me on projecting energy from my fingers. Like, who would have thought of that? I would have never thought of that in my wildest dreams, that I'd be trained by somebody, and I'd be like super happy because I was projecting maybe like a 2 centimeters worth of light from my fingers, and while he could project like huge beams, and he thought that was super easy, and he was laughing at me because I was so dumb at it. And also when I like in 2012 December, end of the world thing, I was meditating a lot for the planet, and so this would be like actually the first month of ever meditating, and I'd meditate for half an hour, and I went to bed. And this is why I tell people meditate and try to connect, because things do happen. I would, upon going to bed, as soon as I closed my eyes, I'd see a black and white like projection on my left eyelid, because I'd open my eyes, and only time I would see it is when I would close my left eye. And what I would see was a black and white TV, and in that TV was a side view of an old typewriter with those cylinders on top that you'd push, and somebody was typing. And that the feeling that I got from that was somebody could have been my higher self, could have been somebody else. Something wanted me to blog my stories online, because the experiencer contactee abductee I was dating at the time was doing the same. So when I saw that, I had the feeling to do that. So the next day, I go online, create an account, and start blogging. I got the PDFs. I deleted the account, but I still got the PDFs from back in the day. And as soon as I started blogging, the evening after, like a few hours after, I started meditating again before going to bed. And I go to bed, and I'm not really expecting anything, because I thought that was a fluke. That was just, a weird thing. But this time, instead of and that black and white TV box, instead of a typewriter, I would see 2 hands shaking on it. So what I got from that is they were congratulating me on a job well done. That's what they wanted. They wanted me to blog it. I did it, and they're things thanks. So from that moment on, that thing also sort of pushed me on a path of where I am now, because of the fact that I was able to talk about it more. I eventually befriended the Starborn people on the internet, and there were a group of experiencers, and that's when I met Audrey Hewins, Debbie Hewins, the Hewins twins. Their story is somewhat well known in the U.S., and because of them, I was brought onto something else. I went on a Japanese TV show. Audrey asked me to take part in her first, in her, like, I think it was the last Experiencer Speak of 2016 in Maine. So I drove down from Canada to Maine, and I spoke at my first conference. So it's these things, they put you on a path. And that's what I'm getting from you as well, is that you're being brought into slowly to something bigger.
Yeah, definitely. And by the way, I was shown that my guys kind of orchestrated this whole thing and kind of inspired your girlfriend and you to contact me. Mm. I mean, I don't know if that resonates with you or not, but that was kind of what I was shown. And I jump at the opportunity because it is kind of a long overdue, 25 years of, having these experiences and not feeling free to talk about them, in everyday life. Now that's kind of changing because of joining the CE5 group, which I'm completely thankful for. But the appearance of the iridescent being was explosive because it was so in my face and up close and personal. So this was kind of, my life. I was talking a little bit about it with the group and learning a lot from it. But I did regret having projected the message that I did. But I kind of want to do a do-over because of that. But what happened the following year was on May 31st, 2021, I started to channel using voice. And it was kind of an evolution from what I was doing previously, which was basically writing, furiously writing as much as I could about what I was getting. And then it kind of made the transition to being voice. And I'm still kind of acclimating to it a little bit because it is very unusual and I don't sound like myself, of course. And it's like a feeling of stepping aside. It's like a stream of consciousness that's coming in and you kind of like step aside and let that stream of consciousness come through. But that was a huge breakthrough for me. And I would send the recordings to some of the members in the group just to share and get their insight over it. But that leads me to, what I previously talked about when the implant was expelled. And the timing kind of seemed serendipitous to me because, the placement of the implant was kind of in the throat chakra area. And I started to realize that it was associated with the channeling, energetic preparation, consciousness preparation, something along those lines. And because I made the transition where the channeling started to become, verbal, directly verbal in real time, I no longer needed the implant. And so that's kind of why it was expelled. But I did go through a period of time after the implant was gone where I thought to myself, what if that comes to an end? what if somehow the implant was allowing this process to take place? And I kind of missed it. I kind of missed the implant a little bit, but it didn't affect the process at all. So I was thankful for that. And, you know, this leads me to talk about the next experience that I had, which was on August 13th. And this one was it was odd, and unlike the other experiences for the most part, but there are some similarities. I was lying on some sort of table, and what brought me to was not being able to breathe. And that's what kind of jarred me into awareness. And I saw on my left a being that had the shape of a gray with the big head and the small body. But he definitely was not like a gray, because he was sort of like, he looked like he was made out of glass. And I got the feeling that the only reason why I saw him was because of the surrounding light was reflecting off of him. And the light was, again, violet, blue, and white. And it wasn't coming off of him at all angles or throughout his surface area. It was just coming off of certain parts, just as if he was made out of glass and there was light shining on him. So as soon as I saw him, you know, I think he became aware that I woke up, and the whatever was over my mouth was removed, and I could breathe better. I could start breathing normal. But there was also more. There was at least two other beings that were to my right, but I couldn't see them. I could sense them though. And I remember thinking telepathically to him, saying, God will protect me. And it wasn't to convey, you know, God was going to protect me from them. It was more like protect me in the world. And you know, during this time, I couldn't really move my limbs, and my body had these weird tingling sensations in it. I felt like I was being moved. And then there was this weird, rapid transition where I was suddenly back in my room, and I remember hearing the sound like a revving up of an engine, like a car engine. And it was very brief. And then I kind of came out. I completely woke up, and I noticed that I was unusually cold. I don't know if you've ever been to Costco and been into the freezer area, but it was like that kind of level of cold. It wasn't a normal cold. And it was like my body was tingling, like it was it had been asleep or something, and the muscles were coming back awake or something. But I noticed that I sit up, and I noticed that the time was 1 o'clock. So there was kind of a correlation. I'm starting to see a pattern that my last experience in October had been around 1 o'clock when I came to. So I remember just laying there trying to remember all aspects of the experience, because I kept getting the intuitive feeling that a lot had happened that I just can't remember. that I just can't remember. And I remember just laying there, just trying to remember. And then I sent out like the message, you know, I would like to remember more next time when this a weird contact experience happens again. I would just like to remember. But there's a period of shock that you go through when you have odd experiences like this. And I remember feeling the need to tell one of the members of my CE5 group about it, about exactly what happened, because, you know, I felt like memories are so fragile and you have to record, you know, right then and there. So you have almost like documentation of all the details that take place right when you become aware of them. So that was the August 13th experience. I didn't have any other marks or anything like that associated with it. But I do remember feeling like it had something to do with healing. The interaction that was happening had something to do with healing. That's my impression that I get.
Regarding your body, you talked about the fact that you felt like as if the blood was coming back to your body. Now, on board crafts, on board, like the Greys really hate the heat. I think they're more, at least the people that I've met that were physically on board a craft, they would explain that the craft was in itself was very cold. The temperatures were very cold. Mm-hmm. And like unusually cold for like a human being. So I'm wondering if you were on a table of sorts and were being brought back, and the fact that you weren't moving, and the fact that it could have been cold. That's what you were feeling. The residual effects of that coldness. So it's just a thought.
Yeah, that's the impression I get. I do recall the background. And it was an unusual color, like the wall behind the being. It was kind of purplish black. And I definitely was not in my room. Not in my room.
How did the walls look like to you? Did you see them?
They weren't smooth. I remember texture. I don't really want to call them bricks, because no, but they were kind of rectangle shapes, one on top of the other. But they had striations that were not like you would think of, like a brick house or a brick wall on Earth. It was just an unusual texture from what I recall. But yeah, I do agree that definitely I was somewhere else. And as these experiences happen, I think to myself, what if I was regressed, hypnotically? Like, what would I remember if I was regressed? Would I remember more details? And so I ponder this over the months of wondering if I should do that or not. But I do believe there's a reason why you remember some, but not 100% of an experience. I don't know if this is to not shock the system, shock your psychology, so you can acclimate to these experiences better, because you're just seeing fragments of them. That's my impression that I get. And this leads me to the next experience. The last experience I had was September 30th. And this was kind of unusual because I can't remember as much, but there was another element that was introduced. But I remember being removed from my bed, the sensation of being moved and being completely indifferent and just being like, oh, okay, you're back again. I felt like, okay. And then I kind of lost consciousness. And then I woke up and it was like in the middle of them moving me, and I was on a table again. And their backs were to me. But this is the weird element. It was like I couldn't really completely see them like in the past, like I was able to see them. But this time it was like they were hidden behind a static screen. But I was being moved. I saw them behind this static screen. And I remember making a noise. That's all I could do because I couldn't move. And I remember making a noise to basically say, aha, surprise, I woke up. and it was a feeling of playfulness, and it was like childlike. There was absolutely no fear. It was sort of like, ha ha, I got one over on you. I'm awake. And all of a sudden I was back in my bed and I was semi-conscious. And then I heard the sound of a woodwind whistle in my right ear. And it sounded really beautiful, and it kind of woke me up the rest of the way to complete consciousness. And then I'm left, just thinking to myself, please, next time when this takes place, allow me to remember more and not less, because I don't understand the static being, almost like hiding behind a static screen. And I heard other people talk about screen memories. It's like your memories are altered and not 100% manipulated, perhaps for whatever reason. And full circle, I started to realize that pattern of 1 o'clock, 1:23. This one was like 1:23, but all of these experiences that were happening were around that time, which I find interesting. And I think that there's a correlation between those experiences. Any kind of pattern that you can identify, you start seeing similarities and whatnot.
So when it comes to these stories, there's different levels of contact. And a lot of people think that, you either got nothing or you got this hardcore level, Travis Walton or Chris Bledsoe, or there's like some in between. And but the others, there's different levels. I've had these experiences when I was dating my British fiance at the time. We broke up, and I was for a few years I was single, and eventually I met this online an experiencer from a few hours who lived a few hours away, and eventually she asked me out. And so the night before I drove down, I was at the hotel. I wasn't really expecting anything because since 2016 there's a huge dip in my experiences, because from 2007 to 2016 there was a lot of stuff happening. And so from that moment, I guess I came out in 2016. So I'm not sure if it's because of that. A lot of the experiences went downhill, but now I'm at this hotel. I go to bed, and so I'm the next morning we were meeting up. So two experiences were meeting up for the first time for breakfast. So this is like in the middle of the night. I'm sleeping on my belly, which I don't normally do, And my eyes are closed, but I'm sort of awake, and I feel two hands on either side of my body, and they're starting to push me on the bed from one side of the bed to the other, because I was on the right side of the bed, and that side of the bed was a direct site of the bathroom. So I'd move, if I have to wake up and go to the loo during the night, I'd go there directly. And so now I'm being pushed on up to the left side, like being glided, because I'm not really feeling the bed. So to myself, I say, oh my God, I'm being abducted by grays or whatever. So I project love to whoever's pushing me. And as soon as I say that, I hear these high screeches, like inhumane animal, insect, monster, horror type of movie, type of sound. But it wasn't telepathic. It was external, outside of me. So as if, oh my God, he's awake. And I thought, okay, well, that's not a gray or whatever. So I sent them love again. And again, I hear these high-pitched screeches. So now I guess I'm in between the bed and the wall now. It's like, that's how I felt it was. And I'm being pushed towards the head of the bed through the wall. And then I get the feeling, I go up and I black out from consciousness. My eyes were closed, but no more consciousness at all. And I wake up during the night. And I write part of the story down on Facebook, except the sound part. I wake up a few hours later, I log on and I start typing on Facebook and speaking to my soon-to-be girlfriend. And I say, hey, I had something last night. Did something happen to you? And she said, yeah. And then she starts explaining the almost exact same experience. She was in bed. She felt she was dreaming, okay? But she's conscious and her eyes are closed, let's say. But she feels that pillows are being pushed on either side of her body, and she's being hugged really, really, really tight and being moved around on the bed. And then she says with her mind, because she had a lot of like third eye visions most of her entire life since a very young age, and she would see grays, reptilians, grays moving around in her bedroom, grays with rods, iPads, stuff like that they show to her, and she didn't know anything about ETs. And so she, as soon as she said, stop moving me around in the bed, you're hurting me, she hears three sequences, 3 high-pitched screeches, like inhumane type of stuff. So as if they were coming to each of us to having a go, and they probably took us on board something to have a look at us because we were like meeting up. So it's either like her grays or whatever, her entities or mine, and they were just checking up on us. So you got different levels. You're I'm asleep or I'm awake, I'm conscious, but I know I'm being moved. And then I had my girlfriend had a similar thing happening the same night. So you do have to put these into perspective that things happen. It's just not, they don't happen the way you want them to be. It's complicated. So that's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is a very good word to use. It's definitely complicated.
It's not like you're going to have this ET is going to come up to you. You're going to have a full-blown abduction. This is what you're going to happen. This is what you're going to learn, blah, 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 blah. And you're going to remember it or not. And no, things just happen. And I don't know why, but you've got stuff going on. And I hope that more will happen to you and that you'll be able to learn from that. And do work on your channeling too. I know Misha Johnston loves to get light language come through her. It's a fascinating thing to hear.
I want to encourage people to come out and talk about their experience. I know it can seem kind of scary at first when you think about it, but we got to go beyond that fear. And these experiences have happened to me for a reason, and it's a very spiritual reason. And it's to show another side of life, of consciousness. And there is a lot of different forms of life out there. And I think that they've been helping humanity all along. I think people have labeled them spiritual beings, angels. And I'm discovering, as I'm involved in several groups on Facebook, that these experiences are more common than I previously thought. And so I encourage, the more people come out and talk about it. And it is very deeply spiritual. I mean, consciousness is another word for spiritual. And we are both physical and conscious beings, spiritual beings. And at our cores, we're multidimensional beings having human experiences. So, this is kind of like normal to me, but I'm realizing that it's normal for a lot of people too. And it's just getting over the stigma attached, the idea that you could be labeled mentally ill, or you're just imagining things, stuff like that. I think that the more people come out, we can support each other. The more people overcome that fear and come forward and talk about it, I think it would be better for everybody. Yeah, and to live your truth, because it's impossible not to be changed by these experiences. And for me, I mean, it was a huge hurdle to come forward. And I think it's because I meant to. And there is a lot of information I'm supposed to convey. But of course, this particular recording is not going to be able to encompass all of it. And I do have to train myself a little bit better in public speaking and stuff like that, to be able to talk about the more convoluted and complicated aspects of the experiences that I've learned. So yeah, I mean, come out and tell your story, and the people who resonate with it, the fellow experiencers, I feel like there's camaraderie there, because they know to a certain extent exactly what you're going through. And it's actually kind of healing.
Yeah, it is.
I admit, to be able to come forward and talk about it without being ridiculed, or just having your voice heard.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I know I've had my own hardships regarding the ABT thing coming out. Even living through this, it's been something. But I feel blessed because of it. I feel more enlightened. I've grown because of it. I have a better appreciation of the universe at large, at whole. And the fear of death isn't really there anymore. It's just that you're looking forward to this other adventure.
Yes.
So thanks for coming on. I've had lots of fun tonight. And to those watching, hope you enjoyed today's show. More interviews coming up, and I'll see you guys next time. So
thank you,
everyone.
Hello everyone, this is Mr. Gray, and thanks for watching today's episode. If you are an abductee, contactee, or experiencer, and you believe that your story could help others, please feel free to contact me through my YouTube channel email. When it comes to experiencers, the ET phenomena, and the future, remember, truth will out.